Oh, thank you. And you have that mic on and that mic on? Excellent. Thank you, Dennis. You're doing great. Good morning again. It is still morning. Thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation. For all of you who are either online or here, thank you for coming to a listening session and being a part of this. It is important that we're doing this together. Anthony is going to share a lot of what is heard. He's going to unpack a little bit for us. Not everything is going to be accomplished here, right? So it's okay if we leave with questions. We will figure them out. There will be a time for questions later, so you can know that that will happen. But I am going to turn this over to Anthony. Many of you have met him already. If you haven't, please do today. He's really easy to talk to, so do that before you go. Thank you for being here, and we are ready for what you have to say to us.
All right. Well, good morning. If we've not met yet, or if you just forget names easily, my name is Anthony. It is great to be with you again. I've recognized so many faces. It was great to get to see you around smaller tables or on screens. Hello, those of you who are watching online and are still on screens. But it's also great to be able to worship with you this morning. I heard you talk about what your worship gatherings were like. It was great to experience it with you. So thanks for letting me be in on that and be a part of the family this morning. We're going to spend some time over the next hour or so unpacking some of the things that I heard, some of the things that you said, what I observed as I spent time with you. But let me just say this, I am encouraged by our time together. There's something unique that happened here that as I was talking to some of my other colleagues about, I kept asking, have you seen this before? Have you seen this before? You had more people participate in listening groups than you have on Sunday mornings in average on worship. That's not a thing we see, just so you know. That was so exciting for us. Often churches, especially coming out of the last couple of years of hard season, churches are disengaged or lethargic or so worrisome about the future that they don't engage so fully in a process like this. And so, not for yourself, but for the others in the room who attended, would you just give a round of applause to yourselves as a church, as a congregation, for stepping into a thing that can feel a little frightening because you're going to tell somebody about yourself and then they're going to talk about it in front of you. And yet you engage, and I appreciate that. Ministry Architects has been doing this with churches for the last 20 years. And at this point, we've served well over 1,000 congregations, helping them from children's and youth ministry all the way through financial systems and church-wide work. And it is a joy every time that a church invites us in to be able to spend time with them, to hopefully listen well, and then plot a course forward. As your pastor shared with you, our work together begins this weekend, but it doesn't finish, right? And so there might be moments today where it seems like a lot, and it seems like a lot of content, and we're with you through that. It is a lot, but we have time, and we have a God who can carry even more than we can imagine. We just get to partner with God as we do the work together. So I want to just give you a sense for a moment of what I experienced when I was with you. We had 70 people participate in listening groups. We had another 16 or so people either send physical letters in, some were dropped off. Some of you brought letters from your friends who couldn't quite make it. Others emailed those surveys in. We had well over 80 people participate in being a part of this process and speaking into things. As I share with you some of the discoveries, some of the things that clicked while we were spending time together, if it's in the report, and I know if you were part of listening groups, you heard this, that means I heard it from multiple people across multiple sessions in multiple ways. If you read something and you go, I was in the meeting where a person said that, I encourage you, don't raise your hand and say, I know who said the thing. That's not helpful. They said something that represented what so many others said. They just said it in a way that worked well with the syntax and flow of the report. So there's no bonus points to be given out. There's no gold stars at the end. If you need a gold star, come see me. I'll figure something out. But first, where we like starting is just kind of a snapshot of where your church is in context of where churches can expect to be when they are your size in areas like yours. I first just wanted to share a couple of the words that, and I often asked you, hey, what are some words you might use to describe your church and your congregation? There were three that in one form or another came up more often than others. You said about yourselves that you are aging, and you are. And that's a true thing. And it came up enough times that I couldn't not say it. But you also said that you're searching for identity, and you are. And part of your engagement in this process is because you are forward-looking as a congregation and forward-hoping, and you are searching. But also, you are family. Person after person, group after group, use the word family to describe this congregation. And if you've been a part of a family before, you know families can be messy. Families sometimes bump up against each other because it's who you spend the most time with. But yet, at the core of a family is this deep love that exists. And I saw it. I saw it as we spent time together. Now, we're going to talk today about changes that or challenges you might have to address as you navigate changes moving forward. But we first like talking about paying the rent. And you might go, what? We don't pay the rent here. That's not what, in tithes and offerings, that's not paying the, what is he talking about, paying the rent? If you have ever paid rent before, you know there are things that you have to do in order to live in the place that you want to live in, right? If you want to have a cat, you should probably be paying the rent at the place that you want to have that cat at. If you want to buy new furniture, it's hard to do that if you have not been paying the rent, right? You should pay the rent first, and then you get to add things in. There are three forms of rent that we talk about at Ministry Architects when it comes to things churches need to be doing before they start taking on navigating large changes. And I believe we're gonna hopefully be able to have some of these things up on the screen as we go, but if not, that's okay. In the report you're going to receive later, they'll have that. There it is. Watch this. The next slide is going to show those words you say about yourselves, right? This next slide is going to have the three rents of ministry. Also, with an amazing model of your church. That is, I love walking past that and going, I could not make a thing like that. That is not what these hands do well. That is incredible. But here are the rents. Let's look at the first one. The first rent, and it should be on the next slide, is the rent of numbers. The rent of numbers. That a significant number of church members need to be participating in a ministry. As we look at your church and we listen to your church, this rent right now is not currently being paid. And here's what I mean. You know the numbers that are at this church right now, whether they're in children's or youth or even adult gatherings, they are not what they used to be. They have declined. Now here's the thing. Even in a declining church, there are times when this number's rent is being paid. Part of why we're naming that it's not being paid here is there isn't a common sense of, so what should the numbers be? Imagine if I went to pay rent to my landlord and I just kind of had to guess at the number I'm supposed to write on the check and give to him. My wife and I still write checks. It's a thing we do. I know those of you who are a little younger don't know how to do that, but that's a thing we still do. Imagine if I didn't know what number to write and I gave it to, I hope this is enough. Luckily, my landlord and I have agreed upon a number that we write on that rent. That's a conversation we need to have as a congregation. What are our expectations in this season? Because if the number is, well, it should just be more, it's going to be really hard to always pay that rent if the number, whatever you write on the check, is never going to be enough. So right now, that rent we're naming is not being paid. The next rent that we talk about after numbers, should be on the next slide, are programs that you need to have a few visible, effective programs that when somebody asks, hey, what is St. Andrews up to these days? That confidently and with enthusiasm, you as a congregation can say, oh, these few things. It doesn't mean everything has to be working, because welcome to church. Sometimes, it's messy, it's family, right? But you need a few visible programs. And right now, when I would ask groups about the programs that are working well or that you're proud of, often those programs existed in the past, but have not yet seen fruition now after the last couple of years of navigating this season of ministry. And so right now, this rent, though unpaid, you paid it for so many years, I think it's going to be easy to go back to paying, but you're going to have to decide what are the few visible things that we're going to do first, that we can get enthusiasm around, so that we have the rent paid, so we can do the things that come later. The third rent, and there's just three, numbers, programs, it's enthusiasm. That there's a joyful enthusiasm of church members and staff. Now, we actually feel like this rent is being partially paid. And you might wonder, well, you just said we're not enthusiastic about things that are happening right now. There's actually a little bit of worry sometimes. I could not say this rent is unpaid with the amount of engagement we saw in this process. Churches that struggle paying the enthusiasm rent don't show up to things like this because they have stopped caring. And you have not stopped caring. You care deeply. And so we would consider this rent partially paid because the anticipation is there. You want to be enthusiastic about what is happening in the life of your church. We just get to name what those things are that we're going to be excited about in this ministry going forward. Those are the rents. So when we talk about paying the rents, we're talking about just simply, like, how are the numbers? Church is not about numbers, but the numbers help you ask the right questions. And again, they give you targets to know, are we doing what we're trying to do? And is it working? Programs, and then enthusiasm. During this process, and the next slide illustrates this well, we're going to be going through what I like to call, and what we at Ministry Architects like to call, a renovation. We're going to be laying the foundation of what we're doing while we're continuing to worship on the stilts. This is a real picture of a real church that had to do foundation work, but they still needed to gather, and so they put the church on stilts. In this season, we're going to keep doing church. We're going to keep gathering. We're going to keep sending. The gospel will still be shared and spread. But there's also going to be work happening. And if you've ever seen a home renovation, or if you've ever been a part of a home renovation, it can get messy before it gets cleaned up. And usually you wait till the end to do the painting, right? That's kind of how that one works. You could paint in the middle of it. That's not the wisest decision to make. It means sometimes you have to live in the mess for a little bit. Part of why we gather you together for this conversation is so you can remind each other of that. To remind each other, we're in a renovation. Remember, things get messy. But oh my goodness, the thing we're building is going to be incredible. And I want you to hold on to that word picture as we go into the current reality that we navigate. We use the word norms when we talk about how your church compares to other churches, similar sizes, similar contexts. Here's a norm we look at. We look at the finances, and we say in a church your size, in a context like yours, a church like yours can tend to budget around an annual gift of about $1,400 per attender. If you take your worship average and multiply that out by about $1,400, you get to what that church's annual budget can expect to be. With 93 people on average attending, that's 60 in person, 33 online. I'll unpack the online number in just a moment. You would expect in a church like this to be able to budget about $130,000 each year. Your budget annually is just over $500,000. You right now, the generosity in your congregation is incredible because your average annual gift per average attender is over $5,500. You are a generous church. Now, that online's tricky to measure. It is. What we've kind of discovered is for the amount of people who don't watch for very long, or people who watch the whole time. Hello, those of you who are still watching. No, because some still are. They haven't completely taken a nap yet. And neither have you in the room. I appreciate that. Sometimes when I'm preaching back home, like I know who's going to fall asleep because I'm not the lead guy, and so you know when it's not the lead guy, sometimes you take a nap. It's nap time when I'm preaching. You haven't napped yet. Thanks for that. But for those who don't watch through the whole thing, there are often more than one person watching on the devices that do stay in there. And what matters most is that you watch those trends rather than try to figure out exactly how many people they represent. But in the numbers we're working with, 60 in person, 33 online. You are a generous church. So when we're comparing you to the norms, they're not targets, it's just kind of what you can expect. This church is funded well to be able to do the things you want to do in the community around you. The next norm, on the next slide, is with regard to staffing. A church your size and in your context could expect one full-time staff member for every 75 people on average in attendance. When we take all of your staff people and kind of combine them down, not physically, because they're still humans, right? We don't want to crunch them together, but if we just take the numbers, you have the equivalent of about 4 full-time staff, which means you're staffed to be a church of about 300 people on a weekend. Now, you also, and this is, so I'm going to editorialize, you also try to do the amount of work that a church of about 300 people do, whether that's in community engagement, the amount of committees that you have as a church. You as a church staff significantly towards your music ministry because it's such a passion of yours, both historically and in the present. That's not something every church staffs towards. So some of these numbers would say, well, right, that's not, the average isn't the target, it's just giving us a baseline to ask the question, so why is that? And I think it's because, as a church, you try to do a lot. And historically you have, and you have in other seasons been a larger church, and you want to keep making that same impact in your community. But the numbers are the numbers, and they're still worth sharing with you. The next one is related to that number. Typical church, the norm is that your payroll percentage would be somewhere between 44 and 55% of the church's annual budget. Yours is about 63% of the annual budget. Again, you are staffed for growth. You are staffed to be able to do the things you hope to do. As we come across challenges, the answer will not likely be, we should add staff, because you've done that in order to do the things that you hope your church can do in the community and here within the congregation. Let me look at the next norm, and it's this. It has to do with your facilities, that you have about 100 parking spots on a Sunday. Now, could people park further down the street? Absolutely. But, you know, if you're visiting for the very first time and you have to park a ways away, that can be a little tricky to do. You have about 100 spots. We at Ministry Architects have found this norm to be that for every 3 spaces, that can accommodate 5 attenders. Your city will require something different. What we're looking at is, what is your capacity before the parking lot feels so full that somebody visiting might go, you know when you go to the grocery store and you go at the wrong time and the parking is terrible? A person visiting church already is carrying anxiety with them. Because either they had a church experience in the past that was not great, and they need to get through that, or they have no church experience. More and more, that is a common thing, and they have their own worries, and if when they pull into the parking lot, they have to worry about, where am I going to park? That's not helpful. And so with 100 parking spots, you have a parking capacity, we would say, of about 165 people at any given service. That would mean on the entire campus, in worship, in Sunday schools, that is your carrying capacity right now as far as parking allows. The next number is related to that. It's not facilities, though. It is seating. Your seating capacity here in this room, I mean, so many of you can watch online, and you're on sofas, and you're comfy, but here in this room, which also, comfy pews, well done. I visited all kinds of churches. Like, I sat down and was like, I now understand what they've been talking about, because for the last 2 days, like, this has been part of the conversation. You have about, and with pews it's hard to get approximate seating, but 333 is what the fire marshal says, so I'm going to go with it. That is your seating capacity in the room. You are right now on a typical Sunday filling up about 19% of those seats. When you start pushing close to that 80% number, that is when a room feels full to your guest who's coming in. Now, Christmas Eve or Easter, you can remember times when you have had more people in this room. That's because those people like each other. They sit closer together. It's fine. What we're trying to keep in mind are those people walking into the room who are already carrying anxieties of what they're thinking church is going to be like. Once you crest 80%, it's like going to the movie theater. Remember when we used to do that? And you go to the movie theater and you're not sure, will I get to sit with the people I came with because there's so many people? Similarly, that 80% number is what we look at. You have plenty of room to grow in here, but it's a number to keep in mind. I want to look at One more number. I believe it's one more. Oh, it's a couple more. Here we go. This one's visitor retention. So a church with really good visitor integration system. So you welcome people in, you connect them well, you involve them in the life of the church. You can expect to see in churches with really strong systems, 10 to 30% of visitors integrated into the life of the church. Last year, 2021, approximately, you had about 15 people visit your church for the first time, which would mean if you did all the same things this year as you did last year, you could expect to grow by 1 to 3 people in the coming year. If you would hope for that number to grow, this is the number you're going to need to figure out. How do we get visitors to come through the door, and how do we make sure we care for them well when they do, so that number might be closer to 30% versus the 10%. Now, I will say this about the people who are here at the church, and this is the next slide. When we look at volunteer involvement, the norm we look at is about 45% of worshiping attenders are volunteering. That's kind of as it shakes out in sustainable churches. You have about 84% of you volunteering regularly, and that should not surprise you, because most of you, that is you, right? And part of it is you're trying to do things that a church of 300 does, right? Which means you can't afford to only have 45% of you doing something, because then things wouldn't happen. Now, as a pastor, I get excited about high numbers here, because really, if you just show up to church and you leave and you don't get engaged, it doesn't feel like it's your church. You're just a consumer. However, if when somebody visits your church, if everybody is going after them, we need more volunteers because we are tired, because 84% of us are doing work all of the time, that can be a little intimidating for somebody who shows up for the first time if we all swarm them because they need to be involved somewhere so we can get a break, right? So this number is incredible, but it comes with some things to navigate as well. And the next slide speaks about small group participation. This could be adult Sunday schools or midweek gatherings. We would expect to see in a kind of healthy, sustainable church, somewhere around 40 to 50% of church members are plugged into a discipleship gathering. Again, whether it's a small group or a Bible study. Right now, you're at about 25%. That speaks to some things we're going to talk about in a moment, where you feel like you know people, but you don't actually know them in a deep way sometimes. Some of you do. 25% of you probably do, right? Because you feel deeply connected to people. But that's a number that we'd like to see increase. You probably aren't going to increase that number, though, if you're just so tired from being all of the volunteers all of the time, right? Because you're at church to worship on Sunday, and you're making all the things happen. When would you ever have time for this? So I have some ideas there, but we'll save those for later. When we talk about staffing at a church, we talk about a sustainable model. We want to make sure in a sustainable model of ministry, people are not getting so worn out they can't be involved in a Bible study or a Sunday school class or a small group. And that's when a church has done a good job of defining these roles. Who's the architect? So who's creating the blueprint of the thing we're trying to build? Who are the general contractors, making sure that work happens? And then who are the load lifters? Who are those laborers? Who are the people picking up the hammer, right, and making things happen? At a Presbyterian church like yours, your session, those are your architects. They are the ones who are discerning God's call on your church to figure out what is it that we're supposed to be building. The staff often in a church like yours should be operating in that general contractor role. However, they have shared responsibilities here between being general contractors and also being the ones doing the work. And then a bunch of you are not just load lifters, but also helping lead things and doing a lot. And I commend you for it. And at the same time, when we talk about sustainable ministry, we want you to be enthusiastic about your church, not worn out by it. And we want to make sure that these lines are clear, and we just named this during this session so that in the future when we use these words, they make sense to you. And you go, oh, I remember when he said that. We need to make sure we tighten those things up. I'm now going to share with you what we consider to be your strengths and some obstacles you're going to need to overcome. When we say strengths, these are things that we want to make sure we protect and we leverage well as we go into this next season of church life together. In a moment, I'm actually going to hand out a couple sheets that have these listed out. On those sheets are also going to be those obstacles, the challenges that you face. Please don't skip ahead. And I know, I shouldn't have to say that because you're grown-ups, but grown-ups, please don't skip ahead. Please hang with me as we look at your strengths together. They're going to hand them out in a moment. Because I know who you are as a church. And you want to fix things, and I love it. This is the best. This is great. It's going to make our work together really, really fruitful. But I just want to celebrate some things first. Like, I first want to say, here's some things you're doing a good job at, some things that you are very proud of. There are 6 of them. I'm going to list them here as the team that are out there in the narthex. Maybe if the doors are unlocked, can come in and, yeah, there you go. And they're going to start distributing these. Let me list them up there for you, and as we list them up there, let me just unpack a couple of them. I'm going to read through the first few. Once I pick up the paper that has fallen on the ground, I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to read through these as these are distributed, so you can kind of listen while you grab that. The report itself is about 30 pages long. I'm not going to give you all 30 pages right now, but I'm giving you what I think you want to see, which is the assets and the challenges that you face. Let me pick these up and read to you this first asset, which is a passion for local mission. So when it comes to this asset, here's how we describe it. This congregation's deep love for local mission and outreach comes across in every listening group. As one congregant explained, I feel like as a church, there's a dominant attitude towards mission and all the colors that mission has. I just feel like as a body, we have a high sensitivity to mission, a commitment to mission. And for me, that's the thread through this whole thing. While other churches may look inward during a season of exploring their future, St.Andrews congregation is committed to looking toward a continued presence in the community as a church that cares for others. Your next asset is what we're calling our supportive senior pastor. And we describe it like this. St. Andrews is blessed to have a caring and pastoral leader in Pastor Robin. Heads in the room nodded affirmingly when one member shared, Pastor Robin's messages are so very personal. When she teaches, I feel like she cares about me. I loved when Pastor Robin let us submit questions and she answered them in her sermons, shared another member. Though the last 2 years have seen a record number of clergy resign from their positions, Pastor Robin remains dedicated to the church and is a steady presence in the life of the congregation. I shared with many of your listening groups, if not all of them, the staggering numbers that we're watching as we find ourselves on the other side of the last 2 years. The staggering number of clergy who walked away from their call and could not continue going. Your pastor made it and still loves you. And you feel it. And that is, I wish it was not as unique to this congregation as it is, but it is, and it's worth naming because so many of you named it. Thirdly, and then I'll let you read the rest on your own, you have a history of a strong music ministry. I alluded to this earlier. The congregation of St. Andrews has fond memories of a time when their music ministry drew crowds to their musical events. I'm excited to see our worship ministry begin to have life again, shared one congregant. The arrival of a new music leader, Jonathan, has ignited hope in the congregation. In the words of a church member, Jonathan's ability to care for both traditional music and contemporary songs is truly a gift. Music on Sunday mornings is something the congregation cares deeply for. Our worship services have a new energy to them, shared a woman in one of the listening groups. She continued, We're known in town for our music, and I'm delighted that we're moving into a time when I can eagerly invite my friends to worship with us on a Sunday morning. Our choir and praise team make me proud. And being able to worship with you this morning, it started to make sense. So much of what you said and about the renewed energy in the room, like, I saw it. I started to feel it. And I think this is something that is worth naming as an asset that you have, is this rich history you have, and also the desire to see it continue. There are 3 more. I'd like you to take a moment, read through those, but don't skip ahead. I'm telling you, friends, hang in there. I promise. We're going to get there. Don't skip ahead. Read through those. They are your large facility. You are financially strong. You are ready to do what's next. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to look at those. If you are watching online, again, I'm so glad that you are here. You're going to have access to this report in its full this week. We're going to be sending it out digitally. We're going to be making it accessible. But if you're in the room and you have the report, read through what you had to say about those assets that you have. what I'll do is I'll watch for when your eyes start coming back up. That'll let me know that you're not reading ahead to challenges, and I appreciate it. And then as you're ready, I'd like to take a couple minutes and let you turn to somebody near you. Respect their personal space, but turn to somebody near you. I gotta say, it's important. And with somebody who's near you, share with them something that stood out, something that you're maybe excited to see is there listed as an asset. Maybe something you're surprised is there as an asset. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to share with each other. Just, one other person, maybe two other people, and then we'll come back together. And if you're watching online, again, we're so glad you're here. When you get to see the report this week, it'll have my email address in it. You send me an email. Say what surprised you, what you're excited about. I'm going to give you about one more minute. You're going to have plenty of time to talk about this with food later. But one more minute. So if you've done all the talking and none of the listening, you now get to listen. All right. As you begin wrapping up what you're saying, and your attention begins to move forward and not reading through the challenges, I'd love to hear from someone in the room what they heard from someone near them. So not what you just spent 3 minutes sharing, but maybe what somebody else shared, as either something that they were excited to see in the report or something they were surprised to see listed out as an asset. And we'll save the microphone for questions at the end. This is just if you say it, I'll then repeat it back. So if somebody starts talking and you can't hear them, that's okay. I'll say it back to you. But what stood out to someone near you that you heard, or what surprised them? Yes?
Our financial strength. And then the comment was, well, what happens 10 years from now?
Yeah. Okay, so, the financial strength of the church as being an asset. But then the question, but won't that go away potentially, right? Like, we want to make sure we steward that well, and that's right. When we talk about these assets that you have, these are things we want to make sure we protect, right? And that we leverage in order to do the ministry that we're being called to do. What else did you hear that either surprised someone or they were excited to see listed out as an asset? Yes?
Excited to do what's next.
Yeah, excited that ready to do what's next is listed. And again, I could not leave things like this out because of the amount of participation. And those of you, I talked to a couple people as they were leaving who went, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because it was this communal reminder of, we're all actually ready to do this next thing. Now, we're not sure what next looks like, and we want to make sure we don't get left behind. I also heard those things, so I'm very aware of that. But there is a posture towards next, and that is encouraging. Okay, so now we're going to get to the thing I know you want to look at. So let me just name first. Before you flip to it, I know you're starting to because you saw me do it. Let me tell you a story first, a word picture. Pastors like word pictures. I know. I'm asking for so much patience. I am. In Ministry Architects, we often tell the story of a dance floor. Imagine a dance floor. And that floor has hosted some of the greatest dancers and some of the greatest shows. And people come from all around to watch these shows and watch these dancers. And there's this one dancer in particular, the way she moves is just stunning. Like, if you've ever wondered, like, are things intelligently created? You watch the way she dances, you go, there must be a God. This is incredible. The way that, like, this dance brings out emotion in me, this is amazing. But imagine that the dance floor has not been tended to for years. For whatever reason, as there have been chips that happen in the floor and some parts of the floor that begin to sag, they've not been tended to. But gosh, that dancer's amazing. And the way she moves is incredible. And one day, that dancer goes up into the air, and as she comes down, she lands on a part of the stage that has been weakened over time, and she falls and she hurts herself. Now imagine that those who are in charge of this stage and in charge of this concert hall decide, well, what we need is a new dancer. And they take that dancer and they send her away and they bring in a new dancer onto this floor. And there are a lot of places on the floor that she can move and she can dance and she can move in the ways that people remember a dancer moving, but she gets careful around part of the floor and people start wondering, why is this dancer so careful? She needs to be free and she needs to dance in the way that she was made to dance. And as they tell her that and encourage her to do that, she then begins to use that part of the floor that was damaged, and she also falls and is also hurt. And those in charge of the stage and in charge of that concert hall go, we need another dancer, imagine. And as this dance floor becomes more worn and the holes begin to emerge, how ridiculous would it be if we thought a new dancer would change things and we never tended to the floor? Our encouragement to you, as it is with many churches, is to get a sense for the floor before you start bringing in more dancers. There are things that are challenges for you as a church. There are obstacles you're going to need to overcome, and you told me about them. You know what they are, and we're going to work through those challenges together before we do some of the things that you might want us to do. Because we don't want to put more dancers onto a floor that is in disrepair and then blame the dancers or blame the decisions we've made around worship services or blame the committees we do or do not have before we begin making those important and lasting decisions and having those important and life-changing conversations. We're first going to assess the dance floor to make sure that our worship services reflect who we are, and that our staff, as we commission them to help lead the ministries, that they have a clear blueprint and they understand who the laborers are and who the general contractors are called to be. And so as we look at these challenges together, this gives us a sense of the dance floor and the areas we need to make sure we address while celebrating those assets we have and leveraging them for the change that needs to occur. And so, for those of you who are good listeners, and I love you, and you're like my firstborn son who follows rules, and so I appreciate it, thank you. You can now turn to challenges. I'm going to read through the first three. I'm going to list them up on the screen. These are the obstacles that we will navigate together as we move the church strategically forward. The first is an aging congregation. And we write this as we say that. St.Andrews is aging. Here's a quote. We buried so many of our members over the last few years. I'm not sure we have a future if we don't get any younger, shared one church member. Multiple listening groups spoke to the collective awareness that the church's average age is the oldest it's ever been. As one member explained, we thought we could just build the right things, hire the right people, and run the right programs to keep young people in the church. But it's harder than that. I think we need to figure out how to make them feel like they actually belong. Young people aren't the answer to all of the church's challenges, but St. Andrews needs to develop a plan for integrating young families into the life of the church when they're invited to events and programs that are open to the community. There's another challenge that we call it communication gaps. For a church the size of St. Andrews, communication shouldn't be as hard as it is sometimes. The church has a website, a social media page, a newsletter, and various other ways to communicate what's going on in the life of the church. Still, congregants and staff people alike shared they sometimes don't know all the things going on in the church. We have ways to find things out, but nobody looks at them, shared one participant. When another congregant exclaimed, "I didn't know we were doing that ministry again," in one of the listening groups, the rest of the room nodded. The leaders in the church feel like they're over-communicating sometimes, while the participants in the church tend to feel out of the loop when it comes to what's going on and what the next steps are. Until a communication plan is developed that includes consistent expectations for where to find information and identifies who's in charge of making sure that information is accurate, this will continue to be a major struggle for the church. Here's just a snapshot of an anecdote. Those of you who are in the room to hear this, remember this conversation because you probably saw the look on my face. Somebody said, and we were talking about like how the church communicates, how do you find out about things? Somebody literally said, "Now, they probably tell us about that during the announcements, but I'm not listening." And they didn't say it as an apology. It was just because of course. And part of me was like, so we might need to do this differently. That's a big deal. We need to know what's going on, especially as we navigate change together. We got to get really good at communication. The third one that I'll read, and then I'll let you read the rest on your own in this time. And then just like the assets, we'll get to share with those around us. And then I'll listen to what surprised you, what you're excited that we named. This third one, who are we? What are we doing here? We wrote it this way. We've tried to be all things to all people for so long, I'm not even sure who we are anymore, lamented a longtime church member. The leadership teams at St.Andrews have tried to discern a clear direction for the church for quite some time, but the process tends to break down at some point each time. One leader in the church remembers a time when, as they put it, we had these leadership retreats, and someone would get up and write a list of what was good and what we need to do. Then we'd come back a year later and nothing changed. When we got back, things just went into a rabbit hole and never came out. The congregation is hungry for an identity and wants to be able to articulate to others what makes their church different than the others in town. A clear identity will help the church determine what its future plans for worship services should look like. Until there's clarity around the church's identity, there will be confusion about what Sunday mornings at church should look like. I feel it, friends. I know, the assets were fun. And the challenges are real, and there's more than I'm just going to read to you. But I do want to give you more time this time than I did for the assets to read through the rest of these, to read through what we call a lack of a spiritual formation plan, what we call the lost sheep, what we heard about feeling welcomed but not connected, and relying on paid saviors. I want you to read about low numbers across the board and the need for COVID-19 reconciliation. And finally, I need you to take time to read a rich history in the community. I'm going to give you closer to 5 minutes or so to read through the next page and a half. That's why I read the first ones for you, so you don't have to go back and read those ones. And then as you finish, rather than jumping and reading my bio, because we've met, start bringing your eyes back up, and that'll clue me in that you're ready to talk about it together, and then we'll process some of this together as a room. So read through those challenges. If you are watching online, again, you're going to get these, and when you have things that excite you or things that you have questions about, you're going to email those to me. You'll have my email address as well. But for those of us in the room, take a few minutes and read through those challenges and what you said about the obstacles you get to overcome and that we get to help you with. Some of you read faster than others. You are like my wife who just consumes books all the time. I don't want to make you just wait in silence forever. And so as you, even if it's just skimming through the rest of them, are ready to share with the people next to you, not in groups of more than 3, preferably in pairs. Give each other space when needed. I'd like you to share, again, what stood out to you, what surprised you, but also, what are you glad that you're not the only person who sees that as a challenge? So begin sharing together. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And it's not on each one, 1 or 2 things that stood out, that surprised you. Or again, that you're at least glad that it's named, because now we know what we get to work on together. So take some time, share with each other as you're ready, and then I will ask you what you heard, not what you just finished saying. Thanks. And if you've done all of the talking and none of the listening, you now get to listen to the person next to you as they share 1 or 2 things that stood out. So as you wrap up that thought, this is when I will call on a couple people who put their hands up, just for you to share, what the people around you were surprised by, what they were encouraged to see named. And I saw a hand here first, so yes.
The whole paragraph that got me was the lost sheep.
Hmm.
I mean, when I read that, I had to reread it a couple times. And I want to say sometimes I don't know that it's fair, for the church. I mean, when people leave and then if they're not contacted, okay, contact people, they didn't know, or maybe especially with this COVID. But when I read this, I was thinking about when we started to come back to church and we had to wear the masks.
Yeah.
And I noticed, a few weeks of coming and certain people that I was used to seeing, and I did ask somebody about it, or what they are looking at other churches. And, but if we don't know,
Yeah, so
that particular paragraph could be a whole session.
yeah. So to recap, either for those online or, right, just the way voices carry in rooms like this, that section on the lost sheep, right? And here's the thing, like, it should stand out. And I hear there's also some tension there of, but gosh, how do you know unless somebody tells you? We want to put a system in place. We want to help you put a system in place that will at least help you know that there's a system in place. One of the concerns we heard, that I heard from multiple groups was, I don't know if people get reached out to. Like there wasn't a communal knowledge around a process, if a process exists. And fair or not, for someone to be gone from the church for 6 to 8 months and not receive a word out to them, COVID or not, like, is a surprising thing. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen again, right? Part of why we're naming these challenges to make sure, like, I capture a felt thing. This isn't me telling you that this was a challenge. This is group after group naming that, and also people writing letters to me and letting me know that. Let me go to somebody else. We'll have time, I promise. And we're gonna have lunch together. Yep. But what else stood out? What else surprised you, or you were encouraged, was named? Yes.
I was surprised by the rich history.
The rich history.
Yes, being younger, I was not aware of the level of rich history there.
Yeah. So she said, as a younger person, because you don't necessarily have in your memory the times when that was as pronounced. It was interesting to be in a couple different groups, and some of you would remember this happening, where someone would say that is what the church is known for, and then someone else in the room would go, but that was a long time ago. Like, people don't think of us that way anymore. And almost like in a rhythm, someone who's been at the church for 3 years or less would go, oh no, they still say that about us. Because we'd like to think, in some ways, that because that's in our past, we don't have to acknowledge it and be aware of it. But it's a thing that's out there. And so because you're a church that cares so deeply about your neighbors and your community, like more so than I typically see in churches of this size, like the amount of care you want to invest into those in need in your surrounding community, this is a thing that you're going to need to overcome a little bit, or just be aware of as you start those conversations. That's good. I have time for one more. In the back, yes. Yeah, the recognition of, and that means multiple groups in multiple ways pointed out that lack of a spiritual formation plan, right? In churches like this, I think sometimes you've adopted the HP process of spiritual discipleship. The HP process being you just hope and pray that it's happening. And in some cases, like in your lives, some of you, it has. But also in some of your lives, you feel it missing, and yet you choose to still be here. How many others were missing that and sought it elsewhere, right? And you should not be interested in just getting church shoppers, right? That's not the Great Commission, right? But someone who is spiritually seeking, when you can confidently tell a family with young children, hey, and here's our spiritual formation plan. Like, here's what we hope to pass on. If your kid was carrying this little spiritual backpack through our ministries, here are the things we're going to be putting in it as they go. And then for adults, here's your easy next step into the hard journey that it is of following Jesus, right? Like, here's the clear thing you should do as we grow in our faith together. I was also encouraged that it was named, but it wasn't named in a lament as much as it was named in a hope for a thing that could come. There are more things we'll process together. You've only had like this much time to look through it, and imagine the people online have only seen like the headlines of it, right? So you're going to have a chance to digest this, but let me move to the next slide for a moment. We're going to give you some recommendations. In the report, there's even more. But here's the thing about recommendations. They aren't commandments. They're just recommendations. But we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing. And so the ones that I'm listing here for you today are going to be not the non-negotiables, because, they're recommendations. But gang, they're the things we're probably going to need to do to be able to navigate these challenges in a way that we can find ourselves celebrating and enthusiastic in the middle of the renovation and also on the other side of it before we go through them too much. A quick word picture that happened in my life 2 nights ago. So I had a day of a lot of listening sessions, right? Spent a lot of time with you. And by the end of that day, made it back to my hotel room, and it was almost 10 o'clock, and hadn't eaten dinner yet, and made sure dinner happened. I'd been sitting all day long and went to take a sock off. And there's some things that happened to my body, like from when I was a teenager to being in my 20s. I was like, oh, I'm getting older. And that was a joke, because then my 30s happened. I was like, oh, like you can hurt yourself sleeping. Interesting, okay. And apparently there's things that also start happening as you're in your 40s, where you go to take a sock off sometimes, and my back went out. And I know, right? I felt the same way. I'm laying on the ground in my hotel room across the country from my family with more listening groups the next day and all of this work that we're doing, going, I was holding a lot of stress in my body, apparently. Like you had some words to share. But also going, I got to do something. And so called up my friend, Dr. Tim, who's out in California, so it wasn't late for him. It's like, Tim, I can't move. I'm like, is this a thing that happens? And he's like, oh, and he starts telling me the thing that was happening. I was like, is my back broken? He's, no, gosh, no. Like it feels like, but no, you're fine. You're gonna need to lay down for the next couple days. I was like, oh, I appreciate your recommendation, Dr. Tim. That's not an option, right? And so he let me know like what kind of back support thing to get at Walmart the next day, and make sure you have lumbar, all the different things, and I will see him when I get home. And I'm leaning on a podium right now, like this is part of it. And your doctor can give you recommendations, and if you are a patient like I am, you'll go, can we tweak those a little bit? The recommendations we give you, I'm telling you, like, they are the things you should do. You should rest for a couple days when you put your back out. Like, that's a thing. But there are some shifts we can make along the way. But these recommendations I'm about to share, these are ones we really believe are going to be important. And they're the simple 30,000-foot ones. The deeper ones are actually going to be in the report that you're going to have access to this week. The first one is to reframe this next 24-month season. Oh, we're going to go back a slide. This next 24-month season, which means we're going to be renovating through February of 2024, which feels like a made-up year to me. I'm like, am I in a future movie? What is happening 2024? But we're going to be doing work together through February of 2024 to address these challenges and navigate them. We're going to use this as a time of direction setting and infrastructure building for the church's ministry. This is not a quick fix. It took us a long time to get here. It's going to take some time to get out of here. And if you want lasting change, you need to put in lasting work, and that happens over time. The next recommendation, you already got a sneak peek of it. It's on the screen. It's establishing a prayer team to undergird the process. So much of this can feel like nuts and bolts and can feel like numbers and measurable things, and yet, if it's not a process that is supported and founded in prayer, like our work is done in vain, right? And so we're going to establish a prayer team. That might involve some of you who are in the room today. It might involve some of you who are watching online. If you are asked to join a prayer team for this process, know that it is the most important thing that we could be doing in the next 2 years. The next recommendation is this. I need you to present this report to the session and request that they approve the strategic renovation process that we're outlining. They're going to be the architects of this thing. We're not going to do this and go, hey, session, catch up. Like, we need them owning the fact that they are supporting and architecting this process. But also, a recommendation from us is this next slide, that you create a strategic transformation team for the church. So, the guy who told you probably have too many teams and committees for a church your size is suggesting you build another team. But here's why. There's a 24-month timeline attached to this report that any one person, if they look at it, is going to go, this is too much. And if any one existing team had to take it on, they're still living in the house. Like, this is a renovation where we still got to live in this thing while we do the work. We need to task a specific team of non-anxious people, of people who, when something gets added to the list, they go, okay, not, oh no. When something doesn't happen in 1 month and it needs to move to the next one, they go, okay, not, we're failing. The kind of people who, and you know if you are this person, if you like a checklist so much so that at the end of the day you go, oh, I also wash the car today. And you write that on the checklist and then check it off. Like those kinds of people. It's a small team. It's not everybody. And if you're not on the team, that means the team at some point is probably going to reach out to you to say, hey, we need help with X, Y, or Z. Because this team won't be the team doing the things. They're going to be the team making sure the things happen. And those are two different roles. So I can't put everybody onto this team because I need a lot of hands and feet who are going to then make those things happen as we go. That's going to be our transformation team that we are building. You're going to hear reports from them as a church. When we figure out how to communicate, you're going to hear communication from them because we need you to know what is happening during the process. And the next recommendation is this, that you're going to partner with us and that we're going to help the session serve as architects over this renovation project. Our hope would be that we teach you the rhythms of how to do the things we're about to do so that 2 years from now, we pass that baton off and session can keep this good work going. We're going to teach them how to listen well to the congregation because the assets and challenges you face a year from now will look different than they are right now. And so we're going to get to go through a couple laps of the calendar together so that this becomes a regular rhythm of what you do as a church. So it doesn't feel so shocking all at once to go, oh, this is a lot. But instead, you know, every year, these are conversations you get to have so that the church can adapt and adjust where needed. The world around us is changing, and yet the good news of Jesus stays the same. How important is it, then, that we make sure that the methods we're using to share that gospel are looked at and adjusted when needed so that we can keep doing the work that we're called to do? The next slide lists 3 pressure points that we've identified as things that if we don't, in the first 6 months, address, it's going to slow down everything else we do. The first one really is coming up with an integration plan for young families, making sure that we have some kind of plan when people come into the church that they get plugged in, especially as they come in with children and youth. We need to address the lack of identity that exists at St.Andrews. We need to have a common sense of like our Sunday morning gatherings and why we do what we do, but we can't have that conversation until we know who we are. And that will help us define what it is that God is calling us to do in this next season together. And we can't keep putting that one off. That's going to be a conversation we have to have. And lastly, but in the midst of all of that, is filling those communication gaps, making sure that the people who are a part of this church know what is going on and know how to find out what is going on. The next slide says this, and you've probably heard this before, so how do you eat an elephant? Do you know this one? Let's put it back up there. Yep, it is a one bite at a time. It is one bite at a time, right? So you're going to get this report this week. Part of why you're not getting it today, like some of you are like English teachers and you already caught where I missed the the quotes on one of the quotes. This was a lot of writing to do in between my last session ending yesterday afternoon and presenting. So there's still some like grammar things we're tightening up. We didn't want to wait to get it to you until we'd done all of that, but we do want to wait until like we send it out to people who are not in the room to fix some of those little pieces. So you're going to access this week. And it might feel like a lot, because it is a big elephant, but we're going to go a bite at a time. The next slide explains kind of what that looks like, the next one. It is that we have a month-by-month plan for achieving all of these goals. We really feel like we can address all of these challenges. There was not a challenge that you named that I went, well, we can't deal with that one. You have what you need to be able to do that. We just have to sequence the work so we work on the first things first so we can focus on the next things next. The next slide is simply a thank you slide and gives me a moment to honestly say thank you. I am confident in the work that we did because so many of you had voice into it. What happens in churches where a small group of people have these conversations is we come back and this all feels unfamiliar to you because you weren't a part of it. These are your words. I'm just reflecting them back. And I'm so encouraged by then you still showing up today and not just dropping the thing and then leaving. Like, you want to be a part of the work going forward. I'm excited to do it with you. I want to create space over the next few minutes for you to ask questions as needed. We're going to have you come up to the microphone to ask a question. That does not mean to give some kind of, essay on the history of a thing that you and I can talk about later. It is genuinely to ask a question, and I will then genuinely answer that question, and we'll go from there. Is there anyone who has a question first who would like to come up to the microphone, or are we all just that hungry? And that's okay, and you just want to ask the questions later. I'm fine with that. I told them, hey, give me just over an hour, and then we're going to do questions and then have that food ready. So that is what they're aiming for. This is good. Part of why you don't have questions, they're just your words. They're the things you told me. But it would feel disingenuous for me not to still ask for the questions because we still want to listen. So this process started with listening, but it will continue with the value of listening, integrated into everything we do. When we come together, so you saw we did things in smaller groups, and then we're now in one larger gathering with some of us spending time with us online. As we start having those identity conversations and we talk about mission and vision and goals for the church, that'll happen in an inverted way where we bring everyone together, and then those people get to relax, and a smaller group will start taking all of those words and trying to come up with something that then we'll present back at the end. But that's not next week, but that is coming. I saw a hand here. Do you want to come to the mic, or do you just want to say it from there and I'll repeat it?
Can you put the slide back up on the first? Anyway, okay, so let's see, recommendations. For the family.
Yeah. So the pressure point slide, if you want to put that back up there, yeah.
I'm curious what kind of thing that might look like, because we have so few.
Yeah.
So what would a plan like that kind of?
So the question at hand is, okay, so if we need to integrate young families into the church, how do we do that? We're going to help you figure out how to do that in a way that feels like St. Andrews. There are a lot of ways that can look. It's not my job to tell you how to do it like my church does it or how the church down the street does it, but we're going to help you discover how you want to do that in a way that feels genuinely like your church. And in doing that process, when other plans need to be developed, you're going to know how to do that one day when we're not. It's a terrible business model, but we try to work ourselves out of a job. That's what our company was started by a pastor who didn't think this thing through. He was like, well, churches need to not have us forever. Like, they need to stop having us. We need to teach them how to do all the things, which is great, and I love it. But it does mean eventually we don't get to hang out anymore because you're going to learn how to do all these things on your own. We're going to teach you the process of identifying, and you've identified a group of people that you want to make sure when they step into the church, they feel integrated in. We're going to help you develop a plan to do that. But if we just gave it to you, it's the whole like teaching somebody to fish and giving them a fish thing, right? We're going to teach you how to do those pieces. It's a fair question. I just don't have a specific answer for it because we don't know what'll fit best here. I see. Yeah, so is this for the families, the young families who are here right now, how do we integrate them in better? Yeah, and I think it's a both and. I think, and if you were in a listening group where I named this, you're going to hear me say this a lot more times too. It starts with the people who are in the room being so excited about what God is up to in your midst that you can't help but bring others in. And so it would be foolish to overlook the young families who have already said yes to your church to go, well, we need more. Like, step one, like, let's make sure the ones we have are so excited about what God is up to in their midst that they can't help but bring others in. Because when those other young families come in, we want a church of people, young and old, excited to see them. Similarly, when people retire to this community and they come in, we want them to walk into a space where people are so excited about what's going on in this space they can't help but invite them back. Yeah. I'm going to invite your pastor back up. She is going to say a couple quick words and then send us off to lunch. I will be also heading over to lunch in a little bit, but I'll let you get your food first before I walk in the room. That way you can eat, and then you can swarm me later. Keeping in mind, at some point, I get to head over to Philadelphia and jump on a plane. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this. This is sacred work. It means a lot, and it's not done. We have a road ahead, but I'm excited to be doing it with you people because you are good people, so thank you.
You know how we always tell each other that we're fine? Okay. We don't have to always be fine. Even when you text someone and ask them how their day is and they don't tell you their back went out, sometimes we need to say we're not fine. It can seem daunting about what is next. We've already started. Part of acknowledging where we are and being honest is such a huge step. So thank you for being a part of this. This doesn't mean the conversation's over. If there are still things that need to be said, we're gonna say them. You do have my phone number. You can call me. You can also email me. I believe Anthony gave you his email as well. This is something we're gonna do together. This is what we do as a church. We do things together. So please be not afraid. But if you also have sort of some lumps in your heart being like, I don't know how we do that, I think the words Bruce gave us this morning are perfect. We need to try to figure out how to be open and how to let God pull those clumps apart. But it creates rich soil for whatever God has next. And there's such a rich past. There will be a rich future as well. All right, if we don't get down there and eat the sandwiches, Congregational Life is not going to forgive me. So let us pray and go eat together. Gracious God, we thank you for your grace that abounds. We thank you, O Lord, that you are a God who comes and digs into all of the mess with us and walks with us on journeys that are long. We thank you, O God, for one another and that we can say these things and share with one another. We pray for your Spirit to help us know how to hear them, but also how to act on them. So give us wisdom, O Lord. And help us, O Lord, to lean into your love in places that are uncomfortable and in places we have great hope. Go with us, O Lord, beside us and behind us, we pray. Bless this food and this time together. May the conversation continue. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Go eat lots of food.